Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our November PTSA meeting. Thank you for joining us tonight. First off, I wanted to congratulate our Wooten volleyball team that is 18-0 currently and playing in the semifinal tonight, right now. And so we will provide live updates as we get them, but it's very exciting. And if they win tonight, they go to the state championship. So go Wooten. We are pleased to have some guest speakers here tonight. They're going to be talking about college admissions and testing, ACTs and SATs. So if you have any questions ahead of time, please feel free to add those into the chat, and we will address them during the presentation. I wanted to give you an update on the Capital Improvement Program testimony. On November 4th was the testimony in front of the Board of Education for the Capital Improvement Program. For those that don't know, the Capital Improvement Program, the CIP, is the facilities budget for Montgomery County and all public programs throughout the county, including MCPS. That CIP hearing is where the Board of Education hears from representatives from all the various schools on facility issues, renovations, boundary studies, and so forth. We did have a number of parents and students that went and testified on our behalf. We also had our Wooten cluster coordinator that did an excellent job with testimony to try to keep Wooten's renovation project on track. It did get pushed one more year. So now it's pushed to start 2025 year. So sometime in the summer of 2025 is when it's due to have construction start and be completed in 2027. So we're going to do everything we can to try to keep that project on track and hopefully not have it slip any further. We also had the mayor of Rockville who testified for all Rockville schools, including Wooten, and we did provide some information for her testimony to talk about Wooten and some of the challenges with our facility, and she did an excellent job, of course. We also have some other schools within our cluster that need some work as well, and so we had people that in the testimony also talked about Dufeef and Falls Mead and Cold Spring were the schools that also need renovation or capital improvements. So we do one thing to note that Cold Spring and Dufeef will have feasibility studies done, which means that they'll be looking at renovations and looking at possible designs. The Dufeef project, Dufeef was going to be renovated this coming January, and due to Rachel Carson's numbers being reduced, Rachel Carson students were going to go to Dufeef. The capacity dropped during COVID, and so because of that, they had to relook at the building they were going to build, and so they reallocated the funding, and now we're going to take a look at Dufeef in a smaller footprint. So the next testimony that will be occurring will be in January in front of the Montgomery County Council. Montgomery County Council holds the purse strings, and so that testimony will be really important. So for parents who are interested, information will go out probably in December. It's usually early in January when the testimony takes place. And we'll also have students who will testify as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to Nikki for the membership and treasurers update.
Good evening, everybody. So quick update on membership. I put the numbers up here. So you can see that overall we are up from last year, but a little bit down still, just slightly down from the year prior to the pandemic. So, and just for everybody who might be wondering, the printed directories will be coming soon. I've been working really hard to get all of that data updated. It's been a little more work this year with switching to the new platform, but those I'm hoping will go to print hopefully in the next week or so. So look for those. Those will be coming in the mail. So if you don't see your directory like in the next month or so in the mail, you can feel free to send me an email and I can double check your membership and make sure everything's okay. And so next, treasurer's update really quickly. We're doing okay so far this year, a little down on receipts so far for the year where we thought we would be, but we still may get a boost if we get, a few more memberships. But, overall, we're doing fine this year. So I think we're in a good place right now. So not too concerned about that. But if anyone has questions or wants to see any more detail on the treasurer's update, also feel free to send me an email. And so now, actually, I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about the Holiday Helping Hands program. Jen's on with me, and so we are running the program again this year. And right now, as of tonight, we've got 46 kids in 23 families that have enrolled in the program. We might have a few more left this week. We'd asked all of the counselors and PPWs to get us all their kids by last Friday, kind of knowing that we'd probably get a few last minute additions. So last year we had, I believe it was 67 kids with 24 families. So we had some larger families last year. So about the same number of families, but a little less children. So we really need people to purchase items from our registries and to donate grocery store gift cards. But if that feels too overwhelming to you, you can also send us a store gift card or an electronic payment, and we'll shop for you. All those details are on our website. I'm actually gonna pull it up real quick, just in case you haven't seen the website yet, the web page. It's really simple. If you go to our website, just WootenPTSA/holiday, you can get there lots of different ways up here and from the home page. But you can see up here, right, tells you what you can do, how you can support a family. We've got frequently asked questions. These are all the questions that people have asked me so far. But if you don't see your question answered in here, you can feel free to send us an email and we will answer your question and add it to the list as well. I know people have asked me about gift wrap volunteers, and we just got that sign up on Sunday night. So if your kids want to earn some SSL hours, you can feel free to sign them up. Gift wrapping is actually going to happen at Jen's house. We're going to do it Saturday and Sunday, December 11th and 12th from 11 to 4. So it should be a lot of fun to wrap gifts. So as far as sign up goes, the first thing you'll see when you're on the website is how to donate a gift card. It's really simple instructions over here. You don't have to sign up on this little form, but it does help us to kind of know what to expect so we can plan out for the rest of the event. It's really easy to fill out. Once you fill this out, and then you just put what you're donating in amount and submit, and that's it. Not very much information at all that's needed for that. And so for the registries, it's actually very similar. So some of you may remember that last year we had people donate money, and Jen and I did all of the shopping, and that's because it was COVID, no one was vaccinated, and it was a lot of work. But we were really kind of doing all of the shopping because we knew a lot of people didn't want to go shopping last year and things were really hectic. And so we planned ahead this year, and we have developed registries for each child. These registries are based on forms that were sent to us by the parents. So we had forms created, we sent those to the counselors sent those to the parents, and that's where we got all of this data. So it could be things like, my child likes this character, or they like this color, or they don't like this. And so Jen actually has created all of these registries that you see here for each of these children. And it's really simple. For example, you click on the registry and all the items are here. When you go to buy the gift and you go to checkout, Jen's address is already in there. You won't be able to see it, but it's got a registry address and it'll go straight to her house. Or you can pick it up from the store and you can bring it to her. And here, we have links. There's a shopping instructions. These are particular to each child. They've got the links here. So if you want to sign up, you can take this, print it, and you don't have to go back to the website and remember what you signed up for. So we've tried to make it pretty simple this year. Again, you don't have to sign up over here, but if you want to, again, that just helps us know who's shopping and who to say thank you to at the end of all of this program. So, if anyone has questions about the holiday program, at all during tonight, you can always put a question in the chat to either of us or send us an email, and we're happy to help and happy to answer any questions at all. We really appreciate all the support. Jen sent me a picture this afternoon of her front door. I'm sure the mailman thinks that she has a shopping problem. She had a ton of packages at her front door today. So we really appreciate everybody who has already signed up to help. We've had so many people already purchase gifts. You know, you can see like here for this child, if all the items are purchased, I take down the link. And so, you know, like they don't need anything else on here. So if there's still a link, that means there are still items that need to be shopped for. But yeah, we really, really appreciate the support. Jen, did you want to say anything else?
No, I think that you covered it all. Thank you all. And please feel free to ask us any questions if you have some.
Okay. So let's go back to the regularly scheduled programming. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Roner.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brad Roner. I am the principal intern at Wooten. Pretty shortly, actually, I will be taking over from Ms. Bolding for a very short period of time from December 13 to around the end of January. She actually will go to an elementary school, and I will be the acting principal for December and for January. So I'm very excited. And we'll need everyone's support through that period of time. But I did want to mention a couple updates that we have for going on right now. As we concluded marking period 1, we were committed to the 1 period advisory period. And we wanted to take a moment to get student feedback to see how that 1 period advisory, for those that are aware, we have a 1 advisory between 4th period and lunch. It's about 30 minutes. Most of the days on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, it's wellness. It's for whatever the student needs it to be. I'm covering a homeroom actually advisory period today. I saw kids playing Uno cards. I saw another students studying for looked like an AP biology test. It was a little over my head, but I was trying to follow along what they were doing, and others were just chatting away. It is very important for that period of time to sometimes just relax. Other days we do have lessons specifically that go on for the whole entire school. So we took a time to take survey to get feedback from the students of how we can improve it, what changes we can make, so that we could see what we could do differently moving forward for second semester. So as we're gathering that information, we will communicate that out to you as the community and the parents as well. A couple other things I want to mention. First, I would have to mention COVID. We are reminding students to be vigilant about wearing their masks properly. We just did a lesson on that today, actually, that was geared at making sure we are reminded that COVID is still here. We still need to make sure that we're keeping each other safe and doing our part. So that lesson was very important for the students to hear as we kind of navigate now and throughout the holidays as well. And then one of the things that's going to start happening in December is, if you can believe it already, for those current 9th and 10th and 11th, this is the time in December where we start pushing out the course bulletin, select courses for the following year. On the 15th of December, we are going to have a webinar for current 9th, 10th, 11th parents to go over that process again of how do we select courses. And then we go into January is when your current 9th and 10th, 11th grade students would meet with their counselors, talk about the courses that they want to take. So that process is, you can believe it or not, starting very shortly once again. And then the last thing I wanted to kind of mention is Thanksgiving's coming up. Just a reminder that MCPS did close those schools on Wednesdays, so we have a longer weekend. And I just wanted to be the first to thank PTSA. They are providing staff with cider and pie on that Tuesday before the Tuesday leading up to the Thanksgiving long weekend. And I just wanted to shout out to them. And the last, I just want to say, enjoy the Thanksgiving weekend. I hope your children, your family stay safe and relax over that period of time. And those are my updates. Thank you so much. Back to Brian or Nikki.
Thank you. And so I just wanted to take a quick second to just remind everybody that our next meeting is the Alumni Event. So that is always our special event when we have graduates from the prior year come back and talk to everyone. So hopefully, you know, Ms. Carr is working on gathering those alumni now. So hopefully we'll have a list, you know, hopefully in the week or so prior. And so you'll be able to see which students are coming back and which schools they're from. So we really look forward to that event. And we'll be doing breakout rooms virtually, just like last year. Brian, did you have any last words?
No, I just, we hope that you're able to make the alumni event. It's always a great one. We usually have high attendance, and it's great hearing from the students who graduated last year, how their first semester of college went. And it's really helpful for your students to learn from them how, you know, the things to think about as they're looking for colleges. And we'll hear a little bit more about that tonight. In addition, I want to make sure that you know that we had it on the slide when Mr. Roner talked, but the coffee chat's coming up this Friday at 9 a.m. and it's always a really informative and good discussion. You can bring all your questions, and it's just a great hour of having Ms. Bolden there and answering all of our questions. So please join us for that. So, well, that concludes our business for this evening. And so now we're going to move on to our guest speakers. So we are so pleased to have two really wonderful guest speakers tonight, both who work with students, with students from Wooten. We have Laura Hassed, who is a college and law school admissions counselor, independent college counselor, who works with students all across the area. And we have Pavel. Pavel, can you say your last name? I'm sorry.
Yes, it's Sahobek.
Sahobek. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. And Pavel has been here before, presenting on the difference between ACT and SATs, and what how families can figure out which one to take. Pavel's co-owner of the Potomac Oaks Tutoring, and so they offer mock testing at Wooten. It's been virtual, but they've been offering that so that students can take the mock SAT and the mock ACT and learn how they score in each one of those. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over first to Laura, and Laura, you can take it away, and then we'll move on to Pavel after that.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Hosed, and I work at Vinnick EPS, which is just a small counseling company in Bethesda. I've been doing this almost 10 years now, after retiring from a legal career. So I am happy to I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to talk about, you know, it's hard for me because I don't know how many 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grader parents are on this call. And obviously you all have different concerns. So I'll just start by sort of talking generally about college admissions. A lot of things, as you might imagine, have changed in the past year or two and will continue to change. Unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball, so it's hard to really predict where things are going. But you know, we've seen a lot of things that were different in last year's admissions cycle, most notably, and Pavel can talk probably more to this because test optional admissions has been a big sort of game changer. And we're waiting to see how that plays out. You know, last year it was a little different because students could not take tests in many cases. Things were getting canceled all over the place, or they just weren't even being scheduled. And so colleges kind of had to be flexible. This year, we don't know yet. You know, colleges, it's a little different this year if you don't submit test scores because everybody could take a test. But I think colleges are starting to see that they can evaluate students without test scores. And we'll see. We'll see how this goes. So those of you with seniors, sorry, you're kind of the guinea pigs. Those of you with younger kids, hopefully we'll figure it out pretty soon. But just, you know, basics of college admissions, and this has not changed even with the pandemic. The most important things are your grades. Your grades are number one. Your rigor of your curriculum is closely tied with your grades and is number two, I think. And you're being evaluated within the context of what is offered at your school. So Wooten obviously offers a lot of very challenging courses. And so colleges want to see that you are, taking advantage of that. And, sometimes I have to explain to family, there's a difference. Families will come and say, oh, well, we don't need math in 12th grade. You only need 3 units of math to graduate, or we don't, we've completed our foreign language requirement. And so I think one important thing to remember is there's a difference between what you need to graduate and what colleges, what you need to be a competitive applicant at some colleges. And so, I should back up and say there are tons and tons and tons of wonderful colleges out there. And there are tons of colleges that will be happy to have, students at every level. But if you are looking, to be a competitive applicant at the more selective colleges, then you're going to want to take, you're going to want to take 4 years of math and several years of a foreign language. That's always up for debate. And a lot of students don't want to take 4 years of language, which I totally understand. But your rigor of your curriculum is important. And so, since those of you, as I just heard, and as I know, will be picking classes shortly for next year, that's something to really think about. Of course, you want to balance with your own child's, mental health and ability to handle things and ability to do well. And so, it is a balancing act. And if I had $1 for every time I've been, is it better to get a B in an AP course or an A in an honors course? The answer is, there isn't a good answer to that. So basically the most challenging curriculum that you can manage. And then also, there is some context depending on what your child wants to study. So if you are applying to engineering programs, then colleges are going to look more carefully at your math and science classes. And, the language then might not be as important if you drop it to double up in a science, let's say. All right, so grades, rigor of curriculum, they like to see an upward trend. So, if you're taking 2 honors classes 1 year and, bump it up to 3 or 4 junior or senior year, that looks good. If you have a rocky start to high school, as many students do as they adjust, especially last year with virtual and COVID, you can still make a big difference by having stronger grades as you get closer, 11th and 12th grade. 12th grade grades and classes do matter. That's something I see a lot where students are like, oh, we'll take a really tough schedule junior year, but then senior year doesn't matter. And I think that's a myth that I would like to clear up. Your senior year courses do actually matter a lot. Okay, so grades, courses, and then the third piece has always been test scores. Now it's a little bit different because not all, a lot of schools don't require them. We just don't know what's going to happen in the future. But, from my point of view, students, and again, well, I don't want to step on your toes. You can talk about testing, but I think everybody should still take SAT or ACT because I think the test scores still can play a role. Most schools are test optional. There are a few schools that are test blind, meaning that you can't send your scores even if they're good. But aside from those schools, a strong score can always help. So I think testing, still is going to continue to play a role, maybe not as big of a role. We just don't know, and we will see. Okay, so when you are looking at colleges, you have to sort of clear the bar with those academic pieces. They want to make sure that you are academically qualified to do the work at their school and will be successful. Once you clear that bar with those pieces, then that's where a lot of the other parts come in. So that's when they start to look at your extracurricular activities and your essays and your teacher recommendations and your interviews and all of those other smaller pieces. And I'm happy. And Brian, you might need to remind me how much time I have because I could just talk forever and go into detail about all of these. But with your activities, I get a lot of questions about activities and is it okay if my student doesn't play an instrument and do a sport and, do community service? And the answer is, you don't have to do everything. I always say colleges are looking for a well-rounded freshman class. So every student does not have to be well-rounded. So if your student does not play a sport, that is fine. Everybody does not have to play a sport. If your student is, not in a lot of leadership positions, that's okay too. Colleges, everybody can't be a leader when they get to college. So it's fine to just be involved in things. And for some context, when you do go to apply, colleges ask on the application, you need to list all of your activities, and then you need to list what years you did them, how many weeks per year, and how many hours per week. So colleges do get a sense of, it doesn't help to go join a whole bunch of clubs that you go to one meeting a month for, because they're not going to look very substantial on your application. They'd rather see you have a couple of things that you really, devote a significant amount of time to, and, sort of deepen your engagement over time. And they just want to see that you're the kind of person who's going to get involved in things. They've already determined you can do the work, or your student can do the work. They want to see that you're the kind of student who is going to, let me just turn that off, get involved with things when you get to campus and be a part of the community, and not just do the work and go home. So that's, kind of what they're looking at with the extracurricular activities. And it doesn't have to be clubs at school, anything, get a job at Starbucks. I mean, get a job, do things outside of school. It really does not have to be things that are school related, and it doesn't have to be organized things either. I've got students who have done all kinds of creative projects on their own, or just, over quarantine, they taught themselves how to play the guitar watching YouTube videos. Like those, colleges want to see how you're spending your time. So it really can be anything that you enjoy doing, and stuff over the summer and stuff like that counts as well. The other things I mentioned there, teacher recommendations. For those of you with juniors, keep in mind your students are likely going to ask 2 of their junior year teachers in core academic subjects for teacher recommendations. And at Wooten and schools around here, people ask really early. So the spring of 11th grade is usually when students will ask. And colleges really do want to see a core academic subject, and they really tend to want to see 11th or 12th grade. There was some flexibility this year with COVID because, students didn't really get to know their teachers as well last year. But I suspect that they will go back to wanting to see 11th grade. And then there's a whole piece, you may have heard the term demonstrated interest, where colleges, they want to know that you are interested in them. And so visiting, interviewing, if you're not visiting in person, doing virtual tours and reaching out to the admissions rep and talking to the admissions rep when they come to Wooten, anything you can do, and then writing really strong essays that show that you've researched the school and are a good fit. They want to admit people who they think might actually come. So that is a big piece as well. Essays and applications, that typically, the summer between 11th and 12th grade is when students really work on that piece of the puzzle. But hopefully by then they've got a well-researched list of schools together that they're really excited about, that, range from schools that are tougher to get into to schools that are easier to get into, and everything in the middle. There is, I'm looking to see if anybody has any questions, because otherwise I'm just going to I can just keep talking. Has COVID impacted, there we go. Has COVID impacted the admissions process in any way? Well, again, the test optional piece is huge. And then there was applications skyrocketed last year. Schools were seeing dramatic increases. I think Colgate, for example, had like 102% increase in applications. Huge numbers, which makes it a lot harder for colleges. First of all, their admit rates are obviously going to go way down because their freshman classes are not getting dramatically larger. And it just makes it harder for them to distinguish between all of these students. I think it's partially because of test optional and students who may not have applied to some of these schools in the past. Now, granted, a lot of the students who are causing those numbers to go up actually are not admissible to the school, but some of them are, many of them are. And students weren't able to visit schools as easily. And so, at least anecdotally in my small sample size, students were applying to a lot more schools. One question I get a lot is like, how many schools should my student apply to? And I would, in a normal year, I say, 9 to 12, like, 3 or 4 reaches, 3 or 4 targets, 2 or 3 safeties. Although I like to call them likelies because nothing is really guaranteed or safe. But in, COVID times, I had students who applied to significantly more schools because they couldn't visit in person. Or even if they did visit, they couldn't get a real feel for the school because students were like locked in their dorms. And so they just applied more broadly. And that sort of, impacted everything overall. Is it more challenging for Maryland residents to get into Maryland than pre-pandemic? We'll see. It's hard to tell from just, from last year. I think that test optional will make it harder. Maryland, some states have a cap on out-of-state residents. Maryland does not. Out-of-state people pay more, but of course their mission is to serve Maryland, and so it'll be interesting to see how the test optional piece plays out at some of the bigger state schools and whether they go back to requiring test scores. I think it's more challenging to get into Maryland, period. I don't think it's more challenging for Maryland residents, if that makes sense. All right, no other questions. All right, what else what I want to talk about? So the other, difference that, we're dealing with COVID is that students had, they've got these big sort of gaps on their activity list. And, there's times where they couldn't do anything. Their sports seasons got interrupted, whatever they were doing were interrupted. They had a summer where they had nothing. And so I will say that, colleges really, they get it. It's not like everybody was in the same position. So they're going to understand when they see gaps in certain things. And I don't think that, you need to worry about that. I do think that now is the time to sort of re-engage. And if some activities, I had a lot of students who kind of realized, well, I did, I couldn't, my lacrosse season got canceled or whatever it is. And I realized I didn't really miss it. I don't really want to go back to doing that. And so I think that's fine. You just need to find other things that you want to do. And so again, the key is to find something to do. I would have students from the summer who would say, oh, well, it's COVID. I couldn't do anything. Like my internship got canceled, or so I just didn't do anything. And then I had other students who are like, my internship got canceled and that really, that really stinks, but here's what I did instead. And I found, something to do virtually, or I did something, I set up a soccer camp in my backyard or whatever. And so, colleges want to see that you're the kind of student who will, figure out something productive to do. Oh, good. Lots of questions. Okay. Are schools starting to hold in-person tours again? Yes, definitely. It was a slow rollout, and some schools took a lot longer than others. And I think some schools still aren't taking you inside of buildings, and they're limiting tours, and you have to sign up in advance, and, there's different restrictions, but, for the most part, I think almost all schools are back to doing in-person tours. Some schools in some parts of the country never really stopped. Okay, is there an advantage to applying early decision? I would say in the vast majority of cases, yes. If a school offers early decision, and for those of you who may not be familiar, early decision is a binding agreement where you can choose one school and you apply early, usually by November 1st. You usually get an answer in mid-December, and you have signed something, and your parents have signed, and the counselor has signed saying, if I am admitted, I will withdraw all of my applications and I will enroll at your school. There's all kinds of information out there that shows like how dramatically it helps at different schools. And at some schools, it is, the admit rate for early decision is significantly higher than the admit rate for regular decision. There's a lot of factors that come into play there. It's not really that it's easier to get in necessarily. It's, a lot of the athletes, a lot of the legacies, a lot of, the applicant pool looks a little bit different, but there's no denying that it helps. The other piece that's important to look at is that some schools will fill half their class from early decision. So by the time you get to the regular pool, half the spots are already taken in that freshman class. That's another thing we ran into with COVID that I think will level out. But a lot of students took gap years, which means that you basically defer your admission for a year because they didn't want to go during COVID. And so then they were taking a spot in that freshman class. So that was something that we saw a lot of last year that made it a little bit harder. But yeah, so early decision, you have to be sure it's your first choice. You have to not want to compare financial offers from other schools. So it's a big commitment. It's not necessarily a fair system, but that's the way it is. Not all schools offer it. And so if your first choice doesn't offer it, then it becomes, a little bit of a strategic decision on what you want to do. There's also something called early decision 2, where the deadline is in January. So basically, if you didn't get good news from your early decision 1 school, you then have another chance to apply early decision 2 elsewhere. Not all schools offer it though. How early do you start as an 11th grader? I think it's, I think looking fall of 11th grade is a good time to start thinking about colleges and, making a list and starting to research. I think that spring break of 11th grade is when a lot of students will do some visiting. I do think if you're able to, visiting colleges is really, really helpful. Even if you're not, able to go visit, all of the schools that your child is interested in and get on a plane, you can, there's so many schools in driving distance here that you can, take a day trip and see a school in Pennsylvania or Virginia, like a small school, a big school, an urban school. There's so many that you can see nearby to give your son or daughter a chance to, just see what those schools feel like. And then you can extrapolate to schools that are farther away once you figure out if they like an urban school or a small school or whatever. Can you only apply to reciprocity states only if the course is not offered at your in-state school? I think you are probably referring to the academic common market. I think it's what it's called, where you can get in-state tuition at certain other state schools if Maryland doesn't offer the major. I think that's what you're probably referring to. And I believe the answer is yes, you have to be majoring in something that Maryland schools don't offer. And if you then switch your major, then you go back to, then you don't get the in-state tuition anymore. So I have never actually in 10 years, I've had students look at it, think about it. I've never actually had a student do it, but it's a great opportunity if it works out. How important is the counselor recommendation? I would say that, and Brian, I'm sorry, because I know you used to be a counselor. The counselor recommendation from a large public school typically doesn't play a big role. Like if it's just a neutral generic letter because the counselor doesn't know you, I don't think schools are holding that against you. I think, if you do get to know your counselor, fantastic, and they can write a good supportive letter. If you are, if there are problems that your counselor needs to report, that's obviously not ideal. But if it's just, I think families do worry that at a large school, they didn't get to know their counselor. And I don't think that that's really a problem. I think it's fine. I think the teacher letters are probably more important. And so anything students can do to develop relationships with their teachers would be good. I think a lot of schools have the opportunity to include an additional supplemental letter, which could be from a coach or an internship supervisor or a job supervisor. And I think that can make sense if you have somebody who would really add some value to the application and would be able to talk about your student outside of the classroom in a way that, adds something to the story that the counselor letters don't say. Some universities have programs for high school students to have an immersive summer experience for a few weeks. Are those beneficial to learn about a school? Sure. I think they're an expensive way to learn about school though. So, if your student wants to do it because they genuinely, want to do it and want to learn about whatever they're studying and want to spend, a couple weeks on a campus, I think they're fantastic. But I think they need to be doing them for the right reason and not because they think, doing the summer program at Brown is going to help them get into Brown, because it's not. It's a great program though, if you're, again, doing it for the right reasons. And, but I don't think anybody needs to feel like they need to spend that money on a summer program unless they want to. All right. Anyway, okay. Can I talk about the services I offer? Yeah, we work with students starting in 10th grade or 11th grade, depending. And we help them figure out what schools are a good fit. You know, one of my favorite parts of my job pre-COVID, which will hopefully return soon, is visiting colleges. So I've seen, you know, these are all pictures on my wall that I've taken at different campuses. And so we love visiting colleges and helping students figure out what's a good fit. You know, we think it's really important to find schools that are academically challenging and have the right academic programs, but also where a student can, you know, be happy and successful and thrive. And, you know, that might be the most prestigious school they can get into, and it might not. You know, I think there's a lot of schools out there that families haven't heard of that are great opportunities. And then just helping students, you know, be the best candidate they can be, helping, you know, advising them on picking their courses and what to do over the summer and writing their essays and all of that. But it's fun. It's a fun process, and hopefully, you know, it just depends on the student and how motivated they are to do it on their own. And, you know, but what I don't do is ACT and SAT tutoring. So Pavel, if you want to, I can turn it over to you, and then I can take more questions too, but I'll let you talk for a little bit.
Sure. So whenever you're ready, I am ready. And if you want me to start, if there are any questions that you see, that feel free to, you know, interject and answer any questions that you see. But yeah, thank you so much for having us. And yes, you know, Brian, Nikki, Jen, it's fantastic. I think also what you're doing for those families. Laura, it's good to see you. And it's always a pleasure to be here, as many of you, or as some of you, I should rather say. Now, I'm also a Wooten grad, so it wasn't too long ago that I was walking the halls of Wooten myself. So it's always, like I said, a very nostalgic feeling to be back at Wooten, even over Zoom. But yes, the ACT, SAT test prep process is what I'll be talking a little bit about. And with your permission, I will use maybe the share screen option that I think should work, as I have a small presentation that I wanted to show.
That sounds good. Yeah,
Okay,
please go
great.
ahead.
In that case, let me go ahead and start it up. And let's see if we can go to the beginning here. Oh, and start the presentation. So yes, the ACT, SAT. As many of you know, the ACT and the SAT are college entrance exams. So traditionally, and as Laura pointed out, a lot has changed over COVID, but traditionally students would be to take one of these tests, and they would then submit their scores, and most colleges would require them. Now, first I'll start talking a little bit about you know, what the difference is. So if we take a look at the similarities, it's important to remember that they assess on fundamentally in the same skills. And those skills are math up to pre-calculus. So if you are in calculus, or if you are beyond calculus, that's not covered on the ACT or the SAT. And even there's only a little bit of pre-calculus on the ACT and on the SAT, just a few questions. Most of the math is Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. So that means that a lot of students actually have to go back and try to refamiliarize themselves with concepts from years gone by. Grammar. Both tests assess students on grammar in a very similar way, where they have to read passages and correct the grammar rules. And so as a result, it's always good to know the grammar rules, and knowing the grammar rules can help you on both. They both have reading sections where you're reading passages, answering questions, and they also have a little bit of data analysis. The ACT has a section called the ACT Science section, a bit of a misnomer because it's not a real science section, as many of you have heard. It is, in fact, mostly a data analysis section. And the SAT also has started introducing graphs in its reading section, out of all places. So that also means that there's a bit of data analysis there. There are, however, some differences. And so before we get to the differences, I would say that because they assess in the same skills, I don't think students or families should expect huge differences in the scores. I mean, it's pretty rare when we see a student doing, you know, a lot better on one than the other, just because, again, they're essentially assessing in the same skills. But again, the format is different. And so what we find, for example, is that the ACT, more fast-paced, but it's more straightforward. So that's the trade-off. You have less time to do the questions, but as a result, they cannot ask you more difficult questions. The SAT, on the other hand, gives students more time to do the questions, but as a result, it is considered the more difficult of the two tests, at least across many of the sections. And so what does that mean in terms of, which test you might be better suited for? So please keep in mind that these are not, necessarily going to be something that applies to all students. This is something that's going to be, we see trends and patterns. So for example, because the ACT is so fast-paced, that means that a lot of students cannot finish it on time, and that's okay. But if a student can finish it on time, that usually means they'll do better on the ACT than the SAT, just for the simple reason that a lot of students nationally will be running out of time on the ACT. So one of the things we check for is how closely can a student come to finishing the ACT on time. And if they can finish it on time, or if they can come really close, that usually is a sign that they might be better suited for the ACT. Something else we see, STEM-oriented students also tend to do better on the ACT, and that's primarily because of the SAT reading section. It is notoriously difficult to improve upon. It's not impossible, but there are no real, easy shortcuts on that section. Whereas the ACT reading is a little bit more straightforward. They're not going to hit you with these really old, outdated passages from the 1700s or the 1800s that a lot of students struggle with. So again, if somebody's a little bit more STEM oriented and they haven't been exposed to that type of writing style because it's just not in their interest level, then as a result, they might find themselves doing better on the ACT. And last but not least, we've also found that students who have accommodations in the form of extended time tend to do better on the ACT, assuming that their accommodations are properly calibrated, if you will, meaning that they have enough time to finish. And it's for the reasons that I mentioned above. One of the biggest challenges on the ACT is finishing it on time. So if a student can't finish on time, that usually is a good sign for the ACT. And I'll kind of keep a quick eye on the questions here. And so, yes, I will say that if you have extended time in the form of 50%, if I understand that question right, or even 100%, then usually that makes a difference more on the ACT than the SAT. So we usually will recommend the ACT for students who have extended time. Okay, so let me go ahead and go to the next one. Oh, here it is. So other things to keep in mind. All four-year universities accept both the ACT and the SAT, and they treat them on an equal basis. There is no preference. That used to not be the case, a few decades ago. Some schools might have preferred the SAT. Some maybe, for example, in the Midwest would have preferred the ACT, but over the last 20 or 30 years, all four-year universities started accepting both, and they really don't have a preference. Now, again, before COVID hit, this used to be more true, but I'd still say it's true. More schools superscore the SAT than the ACT. And that's just, I think, really a remnant of the past, but at the same time, it still is, I would say, true to an extent. Again, COVID has been a game changer, so we'll see if that trend continues. And last but not least, something else to keep in mind, it's not something that I think should be the differentiating factor in which test you take, but the ACT does allow students to delete their scores at any time. That means that a student can take the test, and then after they get their scores back, if they beat their scores in the next go around, they could theoretically delete their first test scores, and that should be expunged from their record. And so again, if a school is not super scoring, that might be something that they might want to consider. But again, at the end of the day, the big question is which one will the student do better on? So these are just things to keep in the back of your mind. Again, I'm going to take a look at the chat to see if there's any questions before I go on. And I'm seeing that, oh yes, great question. As far as what superscoring means. And superscoring is basically something that some schools will do. They will essentially combine the best sections from each test a student takes into what's known as a superscore. So for example, if a student on one test does better on the math, and then the next time they take it, they do better on the reading, they will take the better score, the better math score, and the better reading score, and they'll combine it into one and use that for admission purposes. Let me see. So the recommendations for 11th graders. First, we do recommend that students take the ACT just to see if they can finish on time or how closely they can get on the first go around. And if they're close enough, like I mentioned, that I think will kind of help us figure out which test is better suited for them. Then usually we'll if they've taken a PSAT, and I know it's been tough to administer those during COVID, but if they've taken a PSAT, we can use that test and compare it to the ACT. Now, again, it's not a straightforward comparison. The PSAT, as many of you know, is taken in 10th and 11th grade. So instead, we look at more at the percentiles for test takers, and then we try to see how they match up. But ultimately, it is possible to kind of get a sense of which one the student is doing better on with a PSAT, and they don't need to take an SAT mock. But of course, if they want to, they can always take an SAT mock and see which one they'll do better on, and that'll be a more straightforward comparison. A few other things to keep in mind that I always want to make sure that families know. Studies show that the best scores usually come out at the end of junior year. And I know that there's a temptation for students to try to get it out of the way early. And I hear that from a lot of parents and students. They say, you know, why don't we just get it over in the beginning of 11th grade year, or maybe at the end of the summer going into 11th grade year. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's just not how it works out, just because age also matters. The students will first have 11th grade under their belt if they take it toward the end of 11th grade. They'll also be a little bit older, as I mentioned. They'll be a little bit more mature, and all of those things tend to help a little bit. And so studies again show that the best scores on the SAT or the ACT come out toward the end of junior year, not at the beginning. So we usually don't recommend 10th graders taking the real test, or even 9th graders for that matter. And that doesn't mean that they can't take it in the beginning of 11th grade for their first time. They can, and it's because, again, most students take it 2 to 3 times. What we don't recommend students do is kind of go into their first test in the beginning of junior year thinking it's going to be their last test, because a lot of times they'll look at their scores, we'll look at their scores, and yes, we'll both agree that they did, in many cases, better, but there's maybe a little bit more room for improvement, and they'll usually beat those scores later down the line. So I think timing when to take these tests is important, because again, I think it's more of a marathon and not a sprint when it comes to these things, especially if you're starting out early. And again, I'm gonna keep an eye on the chat just to see if anybody's asking anything. Can you speak more about the testing accommodations? My son's okay. And so in that case, I'm gonna unfortunately for that question, I might need to double check, because that's a very specific question. So I will say that in terms of accommodations, usually if students, so again, it's something that I would double check just because each test is a little bit different. But in many cases, the ACT and the SAT defer to the school on what accommodations to give students. And so what that means is if a student is getting accommodations in school, that almost always means they're going to get it for these tests. However, if they haven't been getting these accommodations in school, then that usually means it might be a little tougher to get them for these tests. And so as a result, we will probably defer again to what the school says in that case. In many cases, the schools will work with the students to find the proper accommodations. But we do recommend that if somebody thinks that they're eligible for them, to reach out to their counselors sooner rather than later, so that the counselors know about it and they can take steps to make sure that when the time comes, they have them. And again, I think it kind of depends on what the accommodations are for. All right, moving on to the next one. So one of the most important things we also try to do is help students find out what score they need. So a lot of times I think students are kind of coming into this a little bit blind, and they're not sure what score they need, in the sense that they're not sure at what point their score helps them and at what point maybe it doesn't help them. And I think that goes back to what Laura was talking about. If you're going test optional, or if test optional is an option, at what point does it make sense for you to submit your score? And at what point maybe you should not submit your score? And I think that's going to be a big question moving forward. And so it kind of depends, just like Laura said, on the GPA, which is, I agree, the most important factor in the admissions process. And so what we don't want is for there to be a big discrepancy between the GPA and the SAT and ACT scores, because colleges also don't want to see a big discrepancy. You can't necessarily, if you have a slightly lower GPA, you can't necessarily compensate for that with a much higher SAT or ACT. They do really want to see both where they are accepting students at. And so this kind of graph kind of gives you an idea of the relationship between weighted GPAs and the corresponding SAT and ACT scores. So again, if you are looking to get into, let's say, I understand University of Maryland was mentioned, well, the average accepted weighted GPA from Wooten actually into College Park is about a 4.38. So again, it's been climbing, and it's been climbing partially because during COVID, a lot of the grading policies have been relaxed, and as a result, more students are doing better. And as a result, that is tending to go up a little bit. And what that means is that the average accepted ACT that's equivalent to that GPA is about a 31 or a 14.27. So again, not to overwhelm anybody with these numbers, just kind of saying that it's not that you're coming in and saying, I want a perfect score. I think it depends on what your situation is, which colleges you're applying to, what your weighted GPA is, and that can help you figure out what score you need. And if you can get that score, then you're submitting it in many cases. If not, then you might want to go test optional. Speaking of test optional, I'll mention one more thing. I think Laura brought up, again, another great point, that we are kind of in uncharted waters in the sense that we don't know if colleges will continue to offer test optional. But what we're also seeing is that they say they want to be test optional, but then when we look at, for example, the admission rates, UPenn, 74% of applicants who got in had test scores. Georgetown, 90% of applicants who got in had test scores. So they are taking students who are going test optional. However, at the same time, it seems like they're taking, in not every college, but some colleges are taking a clear majority of students who have test scores. And so again, that goes back to the point that I was kind of making, is you want to submit them if it helps you, but you may want to go test optional if it doesn't. And so again, that I think is something that you should speak to a college consultant about to help you make that decision. Looking at the chat again, just to see if there's any other questions. Okay, and the answer to the question that I just got was that if they, okay, so if someone has a 504 or an IEP in school, that almost always means that they will get accommodations for the ACT and the SAT. So that's usually been the case. I can't remember of any exceptions to that rule, and it means that the school, again, is supporting their accommodations and they are aware of it. And it's not a student who, for example, hasn't had any accommodations at school that's applying for these accommodations, and then the ACT and the SAT doesn't really know what to do with that. So that would be, I think, fine. And so moving forward to younger students. Oh, here it is. So younger students, 9th, 10th graders, even below, I think it's also important to remember that in many cases, it's hard to make a determination of which test you're going to end up doing better on that early. So for example, sometimes we'll have 9th and 10th graders coming and they want to find out which test they should focus on, because if they can pick a test and they can focus on it for the next, number of years, then they feel like they'll do better on it. But it's just not the way it really works a lot of times. And for example, the ACT, very fast-paced. Most 9th and 10th graders can't finish it on time. And so as a result, sometimes it's just too early to find out whether they can finish it on time. Instead, what we recommend is that because these tests assess students in the same skills, that they work to hone those skills. And one way they can find out whether they need to sharpen those skills is by taking a PSAT. So a PSAT, again, Wooten has been administering those, I believe, to 10th and 11th graders. But at any time, I think you can, find a way to take that PSAT, and they're for different grade levels. And the beauty of the PSAT is that it allows us or the families to get a sense of what score they're on pace to get as 11th graders. And then that kind of gives them more options, because they can decide if they're happy with that score, or for example, if they're unhappy, they can take steps to try to improve that score. So for example, going back to University of Maryland, College Park, with a 31 and a 14.27 average ACT and SAT score, that's a very high ACT and SAT score. So the percentiles would be around the 95th percentile, meaning that you have to score better than 95% of test takers to get those scores. So if you take a PSAT, let's say as a 9th grader, and you find out that you're below that percentile for your grade, that might be an indication, if you want to go to University of Maryland, College Park, for example, that you need to sharpen some of those skills. And again, some of those skills take longer to sharpen than others. Grammar usually takes about 8 weeks to learn, but reading, for example, might take a little bit longer. So I think the sooner parents and students know what skills, if any, they need to sharpen for these tests, the more options they'll have and the more prepared they'll be. And that's basically the recommendation for the younger students. So with that being said, I know that, again, everybody is probably a little tired, so I don't want to take up too much time. But if anybody has any questions for me, I'll also be more than happy to answer them. And thank you so much again to all the PTSA members who have invited us.
I was just seeing if there's any questions from anyone. Volleyball update, the Wooten volleyball team is down 2-0 in sets. So hopefully they'll come back. So I do know that I believe University of California, I think it's University of California, decided to drop the SAT and ACT requirement, and I know that's largest school system in the country. Do we think that could be moving to other state schools, or have you heard what people are thinking, and whether universities are talking about getting rid of the requirement altogether?
So if you want, Laura, it's all yours, or if you want, I can try to answer it first, and then if you'd like, you can add anything. But my understanding, and again, Laura, please feel free to jump in. My understanding is that the University of California system, because of a lawsuit, had to essentially drop the SAT and the ACT requirements, and they're in the process of developing their own test. And that's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out, because it might be just another test that students might have to start studying for in years down the line. And then the second thing I was going to say before I give, before Laura, feel free to add anything, but my cynical answer to all this is that I think the colleges will want to have their cake and eat it too. I think they love the fact that all these students are applying. It makes their yield go up. Yield is a part of the system that helps increase college rankings. They care a lot about their rankings. And so what I think they're going to continue to do is continue to allow for test optional, but still take a lot of students who have test scores, because I think, again, they want to kind of have it both ways. They want to see who's got the better test scores in many cases, not in all cases. But at the same time, they want to see a lot of applicants applying because it helps them look good.
I would tend to agree. I am also slightly cynical. I do think there is a difference. There are some schools that were test optional before the pandemic, and so I now refer to them as like true like philosophically test optional schools, although even then I was kind of cynical because it does make their reported averages go up if only the people with the higher scores submit. To your actual question, Brian, the UC system is test blind. That was somewhat shocking, but as Pavel said, it has to do with some legal proceedings, and I still don't know what is going on. I really don't see a lot of school. There are a couple small liberal art, like Caltech is also test blind, Reed, Hampshire, a handful of small liberal arts colleges. I personally don't see that becoming the norm. Subject tests did disappear as of last year, so that's been another wrinkle. For those of you who don't know, that was the College Board had 20-some subject-specific tests that some schools required. A lot of the more selective schools, even though they didn't require them, students would be taking them. So it would be like, they used to be called achievement tests or SAT 2s. And then the College Board just abruptly did away with them last January. So that has also been a big change in the testing world. So I do think test scores are becoming a little less important. It does give the colleges, as Pavel said, a way to have their cake and eat it too. They can cherry pick. There are a couple, there are students who are just not good test takers, but who are amazing students in every other way. And this gives colleges the opportunity to take those students without hurting their average scores. But I do think by and large, colleges do want to see test scores, even though they'll tell you they don't. My cynical 2 cents. And from what I'm hearing, and again, I do not have a crystal ball, I wish I did. It does seem like if anybody's going to go back to requiring test scores, it's going to be some of the larger state systems, because they just need a way to, sort of sort through all these applications, number one. University of Florida never went test optional even last year. So they still require test scores. University of Georgia, which is pretty popular around here, went back to requiring test scores this year. We don't know what's going on for next year, but we will. I think we're going to learn a lot from this current admission cycle. Again, sorry to any parents of seniors who are on this call, but I think we will learn a lot this year when we see how colleges deal with applications, knowing that everybody did have opportunities to actually take a test if they wanted to.
Thank you. Thank you both for that answer. I was just curious about where we were going with testing. Any other questions for our experts that are here? Okay, I do want to mention that if you go to the WootenPTSA.org website, you can find information about the mock testing for ACTs and SATs. We have multiple companies that offer those. And right now and thank you, Nikki, for posting the link. We have multiple companies that are offering those. And right now, I believe they're all virtual, but once we're able to go back into the building, maybe in the spring, then we could offer them on site, in person, as well as virtual if the companies are going to be doing that.
Brian, just to interrupt for a second. I know that Pavel offers.
You're not coming in too clear.
Can you hear me okay? Is that better?
So you sound a bit distant. I think the microphone is.
Sorry, I've
Oh,
had my
there it is.
microphone up on my head. Yep, that's not helpful. So I know that Pavel on Sundays, they have in-person mock testing at Potomac Oak, and Potomac Education, they do in-person mock testing at Wooten. And I think Everest is dependent. They'll work with you. So I don't think that they're necessarily all virtual right now. There are options.
Oh, that's great. Okay. So that's good. So for students who want to take it in person, they can. And for students who want to do virtual, they can as well.
Correct.
There is a question in the chat.
Yes, I saw that. Okay, so if you don't have a strong test score, do you report it or no? And I think it's really case by case. And I have spent a lot of time this fall with students, which is a new piece of the process that we didn't used to have to do, sitting there and going through every school. And it's not, it's not a blanket decision. So if your student has, let's say, a 29 on the ACT, it could be that they report it to some schools and not to others. They decide school by school. So as a general rule, you look at the school's mid 50%. And if you're above it, you send. And if you're below it, you don't send. It becomes trickier because some schools will report they will report the average scores of the admitted students, which is very different than reporting the average scores of the enrolled students, because they admitted a whole lot of students who were probably using them as a safety. And so that skews it very high. So there's a lot of sort of parsing out what to do, and it's fun. We'll see what happens with this testing mess.
I think it's a little sad that U.S. News and World Report seem to drive a lot of the decisions that colleges are making around the admissions process.
Agreed. Definitely agree. But there are great schools out there for everybody. All right, there's another question. How should I choose which major, and will being undecided affect the process? How should I choose which major is sort of a larger discussion, and depends on what you want to study. And again, it doesn't have to be a blanket decision. Like sometimes I'll have students who might want to study business. It's harder at some schools to get into the business program. So they may decide, for example, I want to study business, but I really want to go to University of Michigan, and it's really hard to get into the business school there, and I'd rather just go to Michigan. So at Michigan, I'm just using random examples, they might apply to liberal arts where they could study economics or something else, and then apply to business at other schools. So you don't have to apply to the same thing at every school. If you go on tours or virtual programs, they will joke that undecided is their most popular major, and you can apply to a school undecided. I usually advise students to choose something because I think it makes a more compelling application often. There are a lot of situations where you have to write an essay that says, why did you choose this major, or why do you want to go to our school? And so kind of helps if you have something to talk about there. That being said, you shouldn't pick something like a lot of times students will say, well, if I pick an unpopular major, like, isn't that going to make me more appealing if I want to study, Russian lit? If I want to major in Russian literature, they probably don't get too many of those. Well, colleges aren't stupid. And if they don't see anything on your application that shows any sort of interest in Russian literature. So I think, you want to choose a major that you're actually interested in. That being said, a large percentage of students change their major when they get to college, and not because they were being disingenuous, just because part of college is for you to explore and figure out what you might want to major in. I changed my major twice. So I think, you want to give it some thought, and if you are going to tell colleges you want to be pre-med, well, then you really should probably have some volunteer experience or something that speaks to, your desire to be pre-med. Same thing with any other major, but I think undecided is fine if you are truly undecided.
All right, last call for questions. Okay, maybe you both can share, maybe in the chat. How would someone get in contact with you if they have questions after this evening?
All right. There you go.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead and copy that. And meanwhile, I want to thank both of our presenters tonight. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us on the college admissions process and also testing. I think it's really important information for us as we prepare our students for college. So thank you very much. And
Thank you so much.
yeah, of course. And so we hope to see everybody next month, where we're going to have our alums do the alumni panel. It will be virtual. Last year worked really well virtually, so we're working on the format for it. But you will have an opportunity to ask questions, and we'll have students from a selection of schools. So we're looking forward to that. I know they're looking forward to coming and talking to you. That's something that a lot of our students look forward to coming back and doing. Any last update on the volleyball score, Mr. Roner?
No update that I have yet.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully they can pull it out. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Join the principal for the virtual chat on Friday. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you so much.